Hey folks, it's that time of year where dads and grads are looking for a new gaming laptop, and we're going to talk about mid-range choices and how to make a smart buy, get the most for your money. Welcome to Gadget Blues. This is KC, and today we are talking about getting the most for your money in a mid-range gaming laptop in mid-2019. I was inspired to make this video for two reasons. One is that I was buying such a laptop myself, and I thought I would pass on my research to you folks so you can make a good decision. And two, because while making this purchase decision myself, I found that there were a lot of ways that you could fall into a trap of buying the wrong hardware and ending up with a suboptimal configuration for your money. So I thought that it would be good to get the word out on how to build the best mid-range gaming laptop. By build a laptop, of course, I mean configure to order when ordering online. That's the best way to get the proper configuration with all of the options that you want and that I advise in this video, because most of the laptops that are in stock at retailers actually have somewhat odd configurations very often because they are driven by spiffs from Intel or NVIDIA and so forth, where you end up with a strangely configured machine that has too much CPU and too little graphics, or vice versa, or a great configuration for CPU and graphics, but then only a rotating hard drive. Strange combinations like that. First of all, let's talk about the goals of this exercise. When I say mid-range gaming laptop, I mean something in the $1,200 range that will have good performance with high settings in AAA titles at 1080p, while remaining relatively portable around 5 pounds, and having decent battery life. Actually being a laptop, something that you can use for 5+ hours, not like 2.5 hours with some of those desktop replacement class gaming notebooks that are really not intended to be used as a laptop. I'll outline for you in this video the choices of CPU, graphics, RAM, display, wireless, hard drives, secondary hard drives, battery size, Ethernet, Thunderbolt, etc., and what the main players are in the space from the top brands. Jumping right into the configuration, the obvious place to start is the CPU, and that's actually the most simple of the choices because there are really only two choices I would recommend in this class. That's the Core i5-9300H quad-core on the lower end, and the Core i7-9750H 6-core on the higher end. Note that I normally wouldn't recommend an i5 for a gaming machine, but in this generation, both the 8th and 9th gen Intel CPUs, the Core i5s are quad-core physically. That is enough to handle the lower tier GPU. Speaking of 8th gen Intel, why am I not recommending the 8th gen and instead the 9th gen? Well, the 8th gen is on its way out, and the 9th gen is only a few percent faster in the same configuration. And it would be a good idea to get a 8th gen laptop if they were being blown out at lower prices, but they really aren't. You don't see these deals on 8th gen laptops. And when you do, they generally have something really low end like a 1050 or a 1050 Ti. So if you aren't saving a ton of money by going 8th gen, it makes your new laptop purchase look like a generation older, and it hurts the resale value. Additionally, I would love to be recommending an AMD based notebook here, but unfortunately, there really is only one decent choice at the moment for AMD, the Asus GA502, and it's been somewhat crippled with an anemic 1x1 wireless and absolutely no webcam. So right now, there aren't any AMD notebooks that I would recommend. I'm sure that we're going to see a strong showing with the new Zen 2 Ryzen 3000 series when they get the mobile versions of those chips out with the H suffix later on, but it's unclear whether that's going to happen at all in calendar 2019, and if it does, it won't be with a large selection available. You can wait if you want for the AMD Ryzen 3000 laptops to come out, but there will always be something on the horizon to wait for, so I'm not really one of these wait for the next thing sort of people. You won't have a laptop in the meantime. As far as the graphics are concerned, there are also really only two great choices at the moment. There's the GeForce 1660 Ti on the somewhat lower end and the RTX 2060 on the somewhat higher end. The much lower end 1650s are pretty anemic by today's standards, and the higher end stuff like the RTX 2070 is overkill for 1080p gaming. You might want to consider that if you plan to use the laptop as your primary gaming setup with an external monitor, but here I'm concentrating on building a laptop rather than a desktop replacement. Of those combinations of two CPUs and two graphics, I would recommend pairing the Core i5-9300H with the 1660 Ti or the Core i7-9750H with the RTX 2060. As far as RAM is concerned, 16 gig is the sweet spot for gaming, and you want to check how the laptop comes configured because it's really easy to pop in a second SODIMM and expand the RAM yourself at a much lower cost than the OEM offers. So while for the general public, it's actually lower performance if they ship the machine with 8 gigs using one 8 gig SODIMM, leaving the other slot open for you to expand to 16, because the buyers that stick with 8 gig will have only single channel memory. It actually encourages you as an informed aftermarket purchaser to get another 8 gig DIMM and install it yourself. I do recommend waiting until you actually receive the laptop before you order the second DIMM to upgrade the RAM, because you want to use CPU-Z to check the SPD, the serial presence detect, on the SODIMM, and if possible, order another identical DIMM. Now, you don't have to have identical DIMMs in a dual channel configuration, but I like to do it that way because you know that it's going to match and the latencies and the timing are all going to be the same across both slots. From a display standpoint, again, we're talking 15.6 here. You want the display that has the 120, 144 hertz refresh, but not the 60 hertz because that is going to limit your gaming flexibility. And you don't want to shell out for the 240 hertz because you aren't going to be hitting those numbers with these graphics cards. I also strongly recommend an anti-reflective screen. A glossy screen can look much nicer in the store, but when you actually take that laptop out to use it in the field somewhere, take it to a LAN party event or to a cafe or whatever, you're really going to want that anti-reflective screen, or else you won't be able to see what you're doing while gaming. For the Wi-Fi, clearly you want a good performing current generation Wi-Fi module, and those would be the Intel 9560, also sold for gaming specific as the Killer 1550, or the Intel AX200 Wi-Fi 6 adapter. That's the latest. That's also sold as the Killer 1650. Both of those, the 9560 and the AX200, are good current modules. The AX200 gives you that Wi-Fi 6 if you have or are planning to upgrade to a Wi-Fi 6 router. What you want to avoid is any of the old Intel 3000 series, which are 1x1, the older 7000 to 8000 series, which are down level and have Bluetooth 4.2 instead of 5.0, or the latest 9461 budget chip, which is a 1x1. Then we come to storage. Now, storage, you're going to definitely want an NVMe SSD as your boot volume. And that's going to be PCI Express Gen 3 4-lane device that uses the non-volatile memory express NVMe protocol, which is much lower latency than having a SATA SSD, even if it uses the same type of slot, M2. Those M2 slots can generally take either SATA or NVMe. So make sure that the model you're buying has the NVMe SSD. The size of that boot drive depends on whether you have a second 2.5-inch bay that you can put a drive in for your game library in the laptop, or whether you're going to have to rely on that primary drive to store everything. Most of these 15.6-inch gaming laptops do have a 2.5-inch bay that you can put a 2.5-inch SSD in. Mind you, you need to choose a 2.5-inch SSD that is low on power consumption, not just any random 2.5-inch SSD, and I'll cover that in a separate video I'm making about upgrading one of these 15.6 gaming laptops. 256 gig for the boot volume should be fine if you're going to have the secondary drive to store your game library. Otherwise, you might want to bump up to a 1 terabyte on the boot volume. Note that this is going to cost you more from the OEM than it would to buy one aftermarket and install it yourself, but it's more of a hassle to upgrade the boot drive than it is to install a secondary drive. So you might just want to bite the bullet if you don't have that 2.5-inch bay and buy a 1 terabyte or even a 2 terabyte up front. However, if you can do the dual SSD thing, put your Steam library, etc. on the second volume, then 256 should be more than adequate for the boot drive. Battery size is an often overlooked factor of purchasing any laptop, let alone a gaming laptop. In this class of 15.6 gaming laptops, there are generally 2 choices of battery. The 2 battery sizes that you generally see available are in the 50-something watt-hour class for the entry level and in the 70-something watt-hour class for the step up. I strongly recommend getting the 70-something watt-hour if you can get it with your configuration. You might not be able to pull that off if you got the Core i5 and the 1660, but you can definitely get that in multiple models if you have the i7-9750H and or the RTX 2060. Not only does that battery more than compensate for the bump from the Core i5 to the i7, you can see something like 5.5 hours of actual general laptop web usage and so forth before that runs out, as opposed to some of these laptops that have really poor battery life. Something that is nice to have is a Thunderbolt 3 port. It's not an essential, but it does give you a couple of things. One is it's ideal if the Thunderbolt 3 port is backward compatible to USB 3.1 Gen 2, so you can have that 10 gigabit for storage. See my other video about the Orco enclosure that gives you really fast external SSD for little bucks. And then it will also allow you to upgrade to an external GPU at a later date if the internal GPU gets obsolete or you need something to power an external 4K monitor. That's about it for the configuration choices. Here's a summary of what we're looking at. So from CPU, Core i5-9300H or the Core i7-9750H, that's 4 and 6 core respectively. The GeForce 1660 Ti or the RTX 2060. The 16 gigs of RAM, which you may order as 8 and upgrade with an additional 8 gig SODIMM. Anti-reflective 1080p display at 144 Hertz. The Intel 9560/Killer 1550 or Intel AX200/Killer 1650 for the wireless. NVMe boot drive that's at least 256 gigs and preferably a empty secondary 2.5-inch bay for a SATA SSD. I don't recommend ordering a rotating drive at all in 2019. Then 70 plus watt-hour battery to get that actual laptop functionality out of the unit, and nice to have Thunderbolt 3 port. Looking at the top name brand choices that have configurations in this range that you should investigate, the Dell G5 15, its sibling the Alienware M15, the HP Omen 15T, the Lenovo Y540 15-inch, the Asus GU502, the MSI GE65, and the Gigabyte Aorus 5. I ordered one of those laptops, and I will disclose that in my next video, which will be a review of that laptop. So stay tuned, like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next Gadget Blues.